Hello and welcome. Magnus Protocol episode 5 is out, and I'm excited to talk about it, and I hope you're excited to talk about it too.
Welcome to the full spectrum. We have so much to share.
This is personal screening, and this is one of those where I feel like you could have just put me in there, and I would have probably made a lot of these same stupid mistakes that this person makes, because I just can't help myself. I want to know, and they want to know, and this feels very much like an I episode, right? And that's as much as I'm going to say for those who haven't yet seen Magnus Archives, but it's very appropriate that we have, a certain narrator here for this one. So our case number, and we'll get into everything with that for Magnus Archive stuff partway through this review, as we always do. Spoilers will go up on screen. I'll warn you like I always do. But our case number here is CAT-107-100-120-23-050-22-024, and it's a disappearance, which we're going to get into in a little bit, undetermined invitation internet blog. There's a lot already right there. We're going to get further in there. But this episode opens with Sam going to talk to Lena. The conversation doesn't quite go the way that he wanted it to. He is concerned about Colin. Colin has been yanking wires. Colin is avoiding cameras. Colin is staying locked up in his office with multiple locks on the door. But Lena assures him that Colin knows what he's doing. You know, if he needed help, he could ask Central for help. And if he wanted to, he could just quit. And when she says this, we have that tape spool style effect, that static that rises up that we had in Magnus Archives. So just definitely something to mention there. There's also a little thing here where she says, we wouldn't want to keep any secrets when she's having this meeting. And that also feels very and that's as far as I'm going to go there right now. But we're going to get to that later. Sam goes back to talk to Alice, and he's very clearly frustrated, right? He feels like something's wrong with Colin and that Colin needs help, and he's not getting listened to here. And Alice gives him a whole stack of paperwork that is tied into his response department one-on-one. And she tells him there's no need to file it, but he files it anyway. He starts to anyway before a chime from Freddy stops him. And they have a lot of work to do. And this leads to our statement of the episode, right? And this is a blog, tomsterrors.blogsphere.org, which is a horror blog for horror movies, horror games, things like that. And I did try to dig into this and try to find this blog. I was not able to find anything concrete. I found some really interesting references and some really interesting things that for some reason were coming up when I searched for that. So I don't know if maybe there are old domains that got changed over to other things later on. But I wasn't able to find any actual website for this. I've been trying to check after what happened with Ink Soul. I've been trying to check every time to see if maybe there's a real world equivalent of any of this stuff. But unfortunately, wasn't able to find anything here. However, this is a treasure trove of information. Welcome to my Twisted Mind, a blog on horror movies and horror video games, an old blog that this person used to use long ago and has picked up using again in the current age. And we say current age because they have Patreon links and Ko-fi links and stuff like that, right? But this is a blog they used to use to talk about horror movies, and now they're going to be using it again to be able to talk about them. And they muse on, how their dad watched horror movies with them, and they looked up to the killers in the horror movies, not in a psychopath kind of way, but in a horror shook them kind of way, right? That's going to be important for later. Their dad's very important to this story. Then they have the tagline of one man's trash is another man's terror, and how proud they are of that one. It all just seems like somebody that really likes horror and is just having a good time with it, which I can respect. As I've mentioned a few times, horror is one of my favorite genres because I love that feeling of being a fish out of water, right? I love that feeling of knowing and learning more, and maybe you didn't want to learn that, right? Of going for that untenable esoteric knowledge that is just beyond reach, of having your brain shook in a way that you never truly are the same afterwards. You know, I love that feeling, and that seems to be what they're chasing. That thing that changed their life when as a child they saw a movie they should not have seen. For me, it was The Fly. And so I feel almost a kinship with this person, and it makes what happens to them very sad. So they hear about this movie called Voyeur after they've posted some reviews, and we don't get to see what the reviews are, but review for Fire in the Sky, a review for Sweet Home, a review for Puppet Master 4, a review for Faith the Unholy Trinity, Trilogy. Do that every time. I actually really like that game too, which I played it on a stream not that long ago because I love horror games. But all of these have been deleted. And we find out why at the end. But they mention that they have heard from a commenter that they can't find the comment of anymore about this movie called Voyeur. And that the only review they could find was from another old blog that said, Voyeur needs to be seen to be believed. The scariest movie I've ever seen. And they get a little obsessed, right? They get focused on it. They want to know more. They want to see this movie. They want to know if that's true because they're searching for that thing that can scare them. And that comes up again a little while later. And Cinephobia12220 comments with a link to a website the blog owner says is a contest for a private screening of Voyeur. You can probably see where this is going. I know you've probably listened to the episode, so you already know. But of course, they win it, even though they only put in their name and never gave their location. And they must have just traced down their IP address, right? There's a fun little section here where they talk about how the theater is going to be the same theater they went to see movies with their dad, which winds up becoming horrifying later. But it's just a little sweet moment here of hey, that's cool. I'm excited to go back there. They talk about getting Babadooked, and this really does anchor this story in a weird way of hey, people hyped that movie up to crud and back, and then you go to see it and it's just the Babadook, whatever, not anywhere near as scary as I was told it was gonna be, and that again makes it really hard for me to not feel bad for this person because man, I know that feeling. And so eventually they start to head for the theater, and they talk about how they're really excited to see if this movie can finally scare them, as we were talking about earlier, because even the borderline should be illegal movies aren't getting a reaction out of them anymore. I am very thankful that I'm not at that point. There's a lot of things that still spook me and get under my skin and shake my brain, right? Things like the Mandela Catalog, things like Magnus Protocol, things like the Skinamarink, right? That really just eat at me, and I can't not think about them for months after I've seen them. Gets to the theater, and something strange starts to happen. The phrase unintelligible comes up repeatedly, and it always seems to come up when talking about the theater or talking about the old man. And we haven't talked about the old man yet, but the old man is the only person working in the theater. They're running the ticket booth, they're running the concession stand, they're running the projector, they're ushering, they're doing everything. And they do kind of push off some snacks onto the blog owner who doesn't really want them, but winds up really enjoying them later. But when the blog owner tries to talk about how messy everything is, especially outside, the old man says, it's what's on the inside that matters. Which is, horrifying. When the movie finally does start, it's when the real, I want to say a twist, but I think we all knew something was going to happen here, right? It's when everything comes into focus. You have almost a minute of no visuals on screen and just the mechanical beeping of what sounds like medical equipment. Then camcorder footage that the blog owner says was recorded because their mom wanted them to before the accident or after the accident for the sake of the brothers, for the sake of the blog owner's brothers. And questions, how did they get in there? How did they get this footage? There's some more unintelligibles, and finally, someone in the corner of the screen. Who is that? And the very next line that we get is, Voyeur needs to be seen to be believed, the scariest movie I've ever seen. And though we're not given any more information from there, it feels like that's when all the other posts got deleted, and that was probably the last post from that person. And they are probably dead now, if not something else. And we're gonna really dig into this in the spoiler section for Magnus Archives. But again, if you haven't yet read Magnus Archives, we still got a little bit more to go. Don't run away yet, but you really need to listen to, I think I said read a minute ago. I'm very tired. You really need to listen to the Magnus Archives. It's absolutely wonderful, absolutely amazing, worth a listen, and it 100% ties into all this. Finally, we wrap all this up for this episode with Alice talking to her brother, and the brother needs more money. But Alice talks about how, hey, hopefully soon you'll be making that money, right? And then Gwen scares Alice and asks about Klaus, the person from last week's episode that was in that video, that audio at least, at the end that Gwen had. And Alice doesn't know anything. And so Gwen storms off. And when Alice says, "What's wrong with everybody?" the computer, Freddy, pings with a notification. Alice dismisses it, right? Doesn't really pay attention. But I feel like that might have been an answer Alice might not have wanted to that question. And then real quick, before we get into spoilers, this was guest written by Jamie Petronas. Really enjoyed this episode. As I talked about, it was really hard for me not to feel an affinity with this person. I review things, games, movies, and especially horror. I love to talk about horror. I don't get to do it as much as I would like, but I love do it. And so I couldn't help but be like, yeah, this person that just wants to reconnect with that part of themselves that had that childlike wonder and was able to enjoy things. Part of the reason why we started this channel was so I could just gush about things I love and be able to like have that childlike joy again, And so it makes what happens to them really terrifying, right? The idea of their memories, this core memory that is very special to them of their dad and everything there, twisted and used against them. Is the figure that's in the corner at the end there the dad? Is the figure that's in the corner a creature that was watching all along? Is it the old man? Is the old man an avatar? We're going to get into Magnus Archive stuff now because we're about to start stepping too far onto things. So let's bring up the spoilers and let's talk Magnus Archives. This is your last warning. Okay, so this has to be an eye episode, right? Seeing things that weren't meant to be seen, pulling back old memories, the theater that's all alone, the blog post where, trying to get away from regular social media and get somewhere a little bit more lenient to be able to talk about things that they love. It really just feels like, even with like Welcome to My Twisted Mind, it really feels like this is an eye episode. And that if the old man is an avatar of the eye, and if the blog owner is not an avatar of the eye now, if he didn't become one, then he probably was destroyed, right? Just outright eaten. Because it really feels like the eye, again, I'm just assuming it's the eye, but it really feels like the eye projected the deepest core memories onto the screen, and then this person realized they had been watched all along, and it shook them so deeply that all they could do was try to push it on to the next person, right? Of, hey, I'm now going to make the comments about Voyeur. It's the only thing on this website now. All of the rest of the reviews have been deleted, so you want to go watch Voyeur too. So you start digging for it so that you get caught by the eye as well. That's what it feels like to me. Hey, just real quick, editor Trey here. A thought that I realized I hadn't talked about because I didn't put it in my notes when I was editing this video, but it's entirely possible. And what if the author of the blog was the cause of the death of their dad. They mentioned that it was an accident. They mentioned that, who is that in the corner, but they also, clearly this is something very important to them, and their mom wanted them to record it for the brothers. What if something happened to dad and it was their fault and not just an accident? And this is the guilt of that being ripped out of them by the eye and being preyed upon. Just another little thought to think about. I also think that ties into the stuff with Colin as well, that Lena seems like she already knew and that Sam is worried about, but Colin is avoiding computers. He's avoiding the cameras specifically, right? He's avoiding anything that would get him caught, and he's ripping out wires. It feels like Colin knows he's being watched, and he is avoiding that to the best of his ability, which also kind of screams this is an eye episode, right? We have Gwen sneaking up on Alice and scaring her. Just, she's being watched and she didn't know it, right? It all just feels like it's an eye episode, and all that comes together with the fact that John is the one narrating it. Now, granted, John seems to be the one that narrates anything that comes up from the internet that is just like, hey, here is a blog or here's a forum. That's been him so far, but this really feels like the eye. Now, as to what the unintelligible is, it could be individual words, it could be screams, it could be a lot of different things. That's really hard to say. There's a couple times that I was like, oh yeah, no, I feel like I know what that word is. But there's other times where it's like, I'm really not sure. I liked this one a lot. I don't have as much to say about it maybe as I did some of the others. A lot of the statement is just the build-up to the big reveal at the end, but I do think it's very good. And I'm torn on how it affects the theories that I have moving forward, because if they've all fused, this really just feels like an eye episode. And if they've all fractured, then it's really hard to say, is this like the aspect of the eye that is taking the knowledge from you? Because I feel like that's all the aspects of the eye still, right? It's really hard to say, but if it is obsession, then this is an obsession to know the unknown, right? To feel the fear again. And that is a thing that I wouldn't want to give to the eye. Ultimately, I'm really interested in hearing what all of your theories are. I think this episode, above all the others, feels more like it's just like it used to be. Nothing's really changed. And it is still just the eye at work. But for all I know, it could also be obsession. It could also be a fractured. We need more to see, but this is the first one that really made me go, what if nothing has changed, though? What if I'm just looking for a change because I expect one? Because this kind of feels like a regular eye episode. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Until next time, I've been Trey. This has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum that Magnus Protocol has to offer.
Welcome to the full spectrum.